everything that we're doing derives from a meeting we had about a year ago at the Harvard Medical School in Boston. This is based on some discussions Eva and I have been having for the last year and a half, and again with another set of investigators. And the idea is that, and Eva will go into this in much more detail, I'll just do this as a prelude to what comes next, is that often patients themselves know what is best for them, and that maybe as researchers and clinicians at Harvard School, we should listen to what patients say is actually can be done to make their lives better, and then apply the resources of Harvard Medical School, the people, the technology, the systems, et cetera, to actually meet those needs. And so we'll go into a little bit of detail about exactly what we call patient-inspired invention. I'm going to do the first half dozen slides or so, and I'm going to talk about Harvard Catalyst and the Reactor Program, which is where this will reside at Harvard. Then Ava will go into the details of exactly what patient-inspired invention is. And so this is basically our mission. We're funded by a large grant by the National Institutes of Health to improve translational research. So we bring together the intellectual force, the technologies, and the clinical expertise at Harvard Medical School and its affiliates. So this means Harvard, the medical school, the dental school, the School of Public Health, and all 16 major hospitals that are associated with Harvard to improve in healthcare. And again, our mission is translational research. So this is moving from one stage to the next. So this could be moving from basic research into patients initially, a few patients to a lot of patients to major clinical advance, and then maybe even on to products. So that's our mission, is funded by NIH. Within Harvard Catalyst, we basically have 3 sets of tools that we use to meet these ends. So again, we enable collaboration, and we provide training tools and technologies to people. And so we have a large education group. We teach 17 or so courses throughout the Harvard system, all directed to helping academic investigators become better at translational research and better at translating basic discoveries into inventions, into products for patients. We have a lot of collaborative tools, so this is how you find somebody in the Harvard system. And again, there's some 12 to 15,000 people with academic appointments at the various hospitals in Harvard. And so part of our role is to help people find each other and get together. And again, in helping to find people find each other, we also help them find technologies and all things out of the 200 and some different core labs that exist within the Harvard system. So again, it's just so big that nobody can know everything that's going on, even in their own institution, and sometimes on the same floor in the same building. So that's part of our mission. And again, we also provide biostatistics consulting, biotherapeutics consulting, bioinformatics consulting to patients, to the investigators. And again, we have a whole set of open source tools that are available for people also. So this is basically what we do. And then the little bit down in the corner that says funding pilot grants, that's actually what I do and what Ava work on within the system. And this is the Reactor Program. And so our mission is to accelerate clinical and translational research in all fields. So this could be therapeutics, it could be diagnostics, it could be prevention, and translate these to the community. So for us, just funding basic research doesn't work. And what we do in general is we design programs and to support these programs to conduct translational research. And again, this is across disciplines and across institutions. For example, the example we're here to talk about today is patient-inspired innovation. So in a little more detail of what we do, our model is that we identify an opportunity, in this case, patient-inspired innovation, focused on scleroderma. And then we will, and we don't know exactly what the answer is on this, but we'll design, fund, and manage a competitive pilot grant programs to address these opportunities. So Ava will go into detail, much more detail about what this exactly means, but this is a more general way of how Harvard Catalyst Reactor operates. Again, we look for community involvement, and community means all of you, but it also means the entire community throughout the Harvard system. And again, this is the dental school, the medical school, the School of Public Health, the 16 major hospitals, and again, the science and engineering groups at the Harvard campus in Cambridge. This particular program is a little bit different. We have also reached out to Boston University, Northeastern, UMass, et cetera, within Boston. So we also have people involved from those institutions involved in this particular program as well. And then again, we provide long-term support to people and select high-value projects and high-value teams with the goal of delivering a product at the end. And again, Abe will go into detail what a product means in this syndication. And this is a slide you don't really have to look at in any detail, but just an example of projects that we've worked on, the last half a dozen or so projects that we've done. So if you look at the list, you can see there's a schizophrenia project. So we focus on a disease-specific project in this case. There's also ones that look at cancer and endocrinology, so broad areas of medicine. There are other projects that look at the microbiome, so that how the microbiome influences disease. There are also a number of technology-rated projects here. We either use nanoscale manufacturing made available to investigators, or high-throughput screening for drugs. So I'm just showing this not so that you remember this and take it home, but just realize that our remit is very broad, and we can reach again across the whole system to try and find the right people to provide the right solutions for the right problems. And again, our focus today is patient-inspired invention and scleroderma. And I will stop there and turn things over to Eva. Thank you.
So I'd like to start just with something really simple. And I'm not so much going to stick to the slides, and I detest it when people get up and say that, because then why bother with the slides? But what I wanted to say is shifted a little bit just in getting to speak with some of you during the day. So I'm going to try to tailor this a little more on the fly. And I apologize to Jack and Don, who actually seen this particular slide before. But when I was in medical school, one of the things that I was taught by my mentors, by my good mentors actually, was an infinite rendition of remember that the patient is the one with the problem. And to a physician in training, what that means is that you really need to keep your eye on the patient. The fact that you're tired and that you're overwhelmed and that you are upset about something is irrelevant. It's actually that the patient's the one with the problem. The doctor's not the one with the problem. And the patient is not giving the problem to the doctor. You sort of should keep your focus on the patient. And that was well and good, and it served me really well for a long time. But I think the other side of the patient having the problem that no one ever told me was that the patient not only has a problem, the patient actually knows what they need for a solution. And often the patient has very definitive ideas about what the answers are or how they could be achieved. And that's part of the message that's actually gone unaddressed in the interaction between patients and the medical provision complex, if you want, for a long time. And this is really the sort of second part about trying to ascertain from patients what it is they need back from the medical care system and what their own ideas for adequate solutions are. This is really the core of what it is in this particular program that we want to address. Okay. That would work if I could advance this, but I can't. Page down? No. All right, well, if someone knows how to move this, they can show me, because I can't make it move. No, not happening. I'm not going to worry about it. Oh, there we go. All right, so I can't really figure out which one of these works. So what is it that actually happens when something gets invented, and how does it get to be a product? And I'm going to really talk here not about drugs, because the focus of this program that we're trying to create right now is not about drugs. It's really more about things and approaches than it is about drugs. Drug development is a long, laborious, and incredibly expensive process that's being addressed by pharmaceutical companies and specific labs. And the capacity of a small program to reach meaningfully into that right now is really very small. That's not to say, as Gary just showed you, that we don't have programs within our own program that sort of extends into drug development, but the focus here is more really on stuff generically or approaches generically than it is on drugs. It's more about things. And so if you think about the process of how you get to a thing, right, it starts with a problem. I mean, the first thing is being able to define what is the problem that someone has that you're trying to address. And you know, in many ways, the researchers and engineers who address these things for patients know pitifully little. And what ends up happening is that laboratories define an area of interest based on the technology that they've developed. And then that technology sort of gets retrofitted to some sort of patient problem. It's developed as a technology, but it's not actually developed as a solution for a particular problem. And they run around saying, you know, I have an exoskeleton suit. Who could I use it for? And you know, only then do we discover that, you know, well, that suit's not going to work for somebody who's paraplegic and who doesn't have normal bowel and bladder function, because they can't be in a suit all day long. Hello? So, you know, the issue is sometimes if you start with the problem, you can actually engineer a better solution. And that is the perspective that we're taking here. So the first part is really adequate problem definition, and we are asking you through what the initiative that Jack briefly mentioned by joining us in a series of meetings to help define the various problems that are that arise in people who have scleroderma. And those, as you know better than I, are really very broad in scope, because scleroderma is a disease that has lots of different manifestations. It's not a single manifestation. So these are very, very different problems, and those problems change also according to the age of the population or the gender of the population affected. Having defined the problems, the next thing is sort of about, okay, so what are solutions that could fit that problem? Now, in some cases, a researcher is going to be able to listen to a really good problem definition and be able to say, you know, we could address that problem with this following kind of solution. How could we build that? In many cases, patients, however, also have solutions in mind, and great solutions have been built by patients, and that is part of an international movement that's called patient innovation. And that has been sort of trialed in a variety of ways. It's mostly been about sort of showcasing the kinds of solutions that patients have already built for themselves. And therein sort of lies the rub that I can get back to, which is that people build solutions for themselves, but they don't really build solutions for other people, and they don't build solutions for communities. And what we're interested in is obviously, I mean, physicians are always interested in resolving problems for an individual. But in the end, what you really want to do is build solutions that can be fitted to large numbers of individuals who share common problems, because that's how you keep things in production. That's how you improve things, because many people give you input. And that's how you can create value in the solution that sort of keeps it in the marketplace, as it were. Many times patients will have a solution, but those solutions haven't been very much improved. And I've probably heard from 10 of you already today that you've figured out a pretty decent way to hold a spoon, stir a pot of soup, drive a car, whatever. But those are things that could be improved so that that jury-rigged solution is actually more robust, more safe, and functions better. So you sort of go from problem to solution to improved solution. And then you sort of finally probably get to something as a product. And by no means do I mean that a product is necessarily something that has to have a dollar value associated with it. Now, for some products, because they are expensive to generate, it's incredibly important that the product does have a dollar value associated with it. Otherwise, no one is going to continue to produce it. People don't produce stuff at a loss over long periods of time. People will do that charitably over very short periods of time, and then it's over with. If you want to keep it in production, you need for it to sort of be able to generate some sort of income. So there are lots of issues about qualifying what a product is. And sometimes product is simple. And if I can elaborate on a solution that was mentioned at the table that I was sitting at, was someone coming up with an alternative mechanism using a very, very simple device of steering a car. And the product there is going to be the idea. If you put that up with a picture on a web page, then you solve that problem for people. You don't have to make it, they can make it themselves. And sometimes a product is something that's much more complex and really needs to be made in a more complicated, regulated way. And then there's lastly dissemination. So the whole thing I've been talking to you about, using patients to help describe their problems, is part of a much larger movement that's called end-user innovation. It's really about the fact that it's the people who use stuff who generally hold the information about how to make it better and often come up with solutions themselves. And patients are now starting to really engage in this. So there are diabetic patients who have basically built improved insulin pumps that pretty much function as an artificial pancreas. There are people who have built and designed their own grafts for aortic rupture. There are people who have done really just sort of extraordinary things, and also people who've done really simple things, like figure out that in order to get their child with cerebral palsy to try to reach upwards, if they string balloons from the ceiling, that actually child who absolutely will not collaborate with physical therapy will spend all day long trying to jump up and down to get that balloon. So innovation takes many, many different forms. What it does not to do, and I've said this once, but it's really important to us, is it doesn't disseminate. And what we want to do with this group of scleroderma patients and care providers in this room, God, I feel like I've got a huge echo here. What we really want to do is to try to come up with solutions that can also be disseminated among your own community, among the national community of people with like diseases, and among an international community. And in so doing, we want to actually do a second part of that dissemination. And if we can actually come up with innovations that we can figure out how to disseminate across a disease community that are initially patient-based, I will tell you that that will be the first time in history that that has actually happened. So it may sound very simple, but it has in truth proven not to be simple at all. And what all the impediments to dissemination are poorly understood. So we also wanted to try to study this process to understand how to do it again, and every time do it better so that patient communities can be active participants in generating solutions to that fit their own needs, and then extend those solutions across communities. So one of the things that we want to introduce is also some integration of this community with communities that have like problems. And there are two that readily come to mind, although there are actually multiple others. So one is that I come by an interest in scleroderma sort of sadly but naturally, and that is that I'm by practice a bone marrow transplant physician. And when you do allogeneic transplants, and Ms. Kent over there knows this very well, she's a nurse who worked in our area for a long time. When you do allogeneic transplantation, if you get an immunologic complication of that transplant, so for leukemia, for example, and you use a different donor than the person, not an autologous transplant as done sometimes in scleroderma, if you get a complication called chronic graft versus host disease, and that becomes severe, what you get is scleroderma, with every single manifestation that you have in this room. So with Sjogren's, and with Zika, and with interstitial pneumonitis, and with a funky GI tract, and with really bad skin contracture and fibrosis. What my patients end up with because of what I do is exactly what you have, because you have scleroderma inherently. So there is a community of individuals who, as a side effect of their therapy, in principle acquire scleroderma. There are also patients with severe burns who share some of the problems that those of you have who have thickened skin. And it may be by combining that sort of patient pool, both of ideas and definitions, and also capacity to disseminate, that we can create a broader platform of interest by companies and insurers and others in paying for and supporting some of these innovations. So we'll also be trying to address that. You can see pretty readily that anytime you can jump one of these steps, you have a much shorter path to where it is we want to get. And that's why your participation is so important. Because when the problem definition and the problem solution, and having already trialed a couple of home-baked solutions at home, is taken off the page, in other words, when you eliminate the contribution that patients can make, then you make this journey much less efficient, much less creative, and probably much less to the point. It's people making things for needs that you don't even have, and then trying to convince you that you should try to use them. We would like to do this the other way around. We'd like to understand what it is you need, figure out what you've already done, and then use that as a jump start to efficiently get to something that can be used by a community. So there are lots and lots of impediments to trying to do this. If it was easy, it would have been done before. And some of those are listed here. So one is trying to identify patients. And Jack and Don came and presented at this symposium that we ran. It was really a little working group that sort of hung out for the day, a group of researchers and a bunch of people from patient advocacy organizations. And we were really struck that the scleroderma community would be an excellent place to start by the nature of the problems that you have, and frankly by your contributions already in terms of sending in those ideas for different kinds of inventions that might be useful to Jack and his very forceful advocacy for that, and for Don's eloquent support of that by talking about some of the things he was interested in. You need to identify processes to develop this. So it's, again, we don't necessarily know how to do all of this. We are trying to learn, and we want to work with your community to learn how to do this best. We're trying to figure out what are the best ways to pair problems. So the vision is that we would have a meeting as a start where we would ask a number of you to come. I mean, we would invite you all to come. I just get a bigger room. We can do that. That's easy. And have a process by which you both show people what it is you're having difficulty with, describe the difficulties that you have that are not really things that you show, discuss the kinds of solutions that you have invented or that you wish had been invented that would make your daily functioning better, and do that in association with a bunch of researchers who really range all the way from graduate students all the way through full professors in the areas of engineering largely, and a number of other specialties, including software people and a variety of other things. And then, whoa, first I can't move it, and then I move it too quickly. And then see how that dialogue goes and see what part of that dialogue goes well, and then enter into a process, as Gary described, of using our pilot grant money. I mean, we're going to leverage our money into this. We're not asking you for monetary support to support groups of people who will work on some of these ideas, and that too will have some innovative parts about how it is structured. We have some limitations on that. This is money that Harvard has. We can't, in the normal course of events, sort of disseminate that money to places because it's given by the federal government to Harvard to engage in certain translational activities. But we can, in certain constructs, sort of leverage and initiate work in collaboration with other institutions, and we have a very strong relationship with a group very interested in these projects who's at MIT, who's going to work with us, and as we've said, people from Northeastern and Tufts and BU, et cetera, attended this meeting and are interested in participating in whatever ways we can organize. And then think about product development and how we get to the thorny question of dissemination. There are a lot of other, God, I'm echoing in my own ears with this. There are a lot of other ways of, or a lot of other questions. So let me just mention a few of these things. We need to establish what a process of co-creation looks like. So it is not normal in medical research for patients to be co-creators of things. There isn't a really good model for that. So what's the best way for people to communicate? Is it going to be intermittently? Is it going to be chronically? Is it by filling out questionnaires? Is it by physical participation? You know, what does that really look like, and what does it mean, and how does it work best, and how is it gratifying for patients and communities, and how is it facilitative and important for and motivating for researchers? I'm going to skip some of these issues in the interest of time, and I am going to cut sort of to the chase on something that I have discussed with people in numerous settings, and that is that the general sense in the open innovation end user community is that people innovate to solve their own problems, and they don't disseminate those ideas because they're sort of not interested in it, or it's not made easy for them, or whatever, but that they're intrinsically not hoarders, that they don't really want to hang on to the intellectual property rights, and they're not really interested in monetizing the ideas, because if they were, they would, and that they're happy for it to be given freely. My own sense of this is that if you had a really great idea for something and it got made into a device, and the device earned a total of $500 a year, you would probably gladly give away the $500 in order to have access to the device yourself. I also firmly believe that if you create an idea for a device that generates $1 million in revenue a year, you would probably like to see some of the $1 million back, either for yourself or for your organization or for some purpose. But I think there's a line there that people have missed, and that there are probably ways of creating some interesting precedents in terms of how we manage that sort of income distribution. And the front end of that we've already taken care of by some documents that people would sign when they came to the event, that basically says if you are demonstrating an idea that you have for a solution, that the person who thought of it was you. And that's called inventorship and conceptualization. And once there's a piece of paper that says that you are the inventor and conceptualizer, then basically you will own part of the patent rights for that device, however the rest of it sort of works out. so that we sort of put that piece and we cement that piece, and we've gone through this with lawyers, and that will hold. And then what all the fine print is after that, it's really just impossible to work out in advance because you don't know what the thing is and how much investment it's going to take to make it and what's going to happen to it in terms of trying to turn it into something. But what you can do is guarantee somebody some ownership of it up front. Lastly, again, this addresses this issue of sort of what these loops look like and where they're different. And it really sort of, if you look at the end of those arrows, again, gets to this real problem in end user innovation, which has been diffusion, which has been creation hasn't been so hard, but getting it made and getting it out there is the place where this really differs from company-oriented type production. And so we are going to try to figure out how to address that space. And one of the things that we want to do is really to think about how we learn from this experience. We are interested in supporting it, but we are also interested in studying it. So the groups that Gary and I lead have not only been funding these sorts of experimental approaches to experimental research, but have been actively studying the process. So we are sort of doing research on research, if you will. I can tell you one thing that I didn't know, and I've been a researcher my whole life, which is how resistant researchers are to you doing research on them. The answer to that would be very. So they don't like being studied, and they don't like filling out questionnaires, and they don't like being randomized, just the way you are, to an experiment. They hate it. But that's part of the process because we don't know what works and we don't know where the failures in the system are. Why is medical innovation so slow? And it is, by the way, very slow, even though sometimes it seems very fast. Why is money spent so inefficiently? Why do grants not get fully expended? Why is what people report not what they did? Why are things done? I can tell you from research that we've done evaluating really innovative grant proposals that if you randomly, in a way where no one knows who's evaluating what, and if you do 4,000 people evaluating 150 grants, which is a size of review that nobody ever does, and you do all the analytics on that part, you know what the thing is that makes it least likely for you to get funded? This is the last thing a patient wants to hear. The more innovative it is, the less likely it is to get funded. It's not how impactful it is, it's not how fancy it sounds, it's not whether it's too close to my work so I give it a bad score because I don't want it to compete with me. It's actually how innovative it is. The more novel it is, the worse the score, uniformly. So there's a novelty discount when we look at things. And we need to study what we do to learn things like that so we can optimize the process and educate the people who run it so that we can try to move this entire stream from idea to benchtop back into the patient community with greater efficiency and greater productivity. And we'd really invite you to join us on that journey, and I hope that some of you will. We'd be happy to take questions. Or let you eat dessert. Don?
Don, do you have a question?
Yeah, can I be on that list?
You can.
You're on it, Don.
It
No,
did.
Will?
And I will say, I wanted to show you that this made such a huge impression on me. Sometime in this first thing, we are going to invent a device that will allow Don to water ski with greater ease. So this was his challenge to me, and I think we're up to that, but that's definitely on my list. What? We're going to work with Anne and with Jack to try to come up with a time that seems like it's a good time. I'm sure he'll be serving people, and you'll work that out in your community. And then I think for the first go-round of this, the ask is going to be that people come down to Boston, to Harvard, to some space where we have enough room, and we will put together a collection of researchers, because honestly, as complicated as your time is, and it is, the likelihood that he is successful in influencing you to come to Boston is infinitely greater than the likelihood that I can influence 30 researchers to get in a bus and come here. So it's just, I won't be able to do it, and what I want is to have a broad enough, because I can't even get them to come to a meeting on a regular basis. So I think the answer will be you guys will be autonomous. We'll say, you know, I just need to have at least 10 people show up. And if 50 people want to show up, so much the better. And depending on what it looks like the interest in, we will set up rooms and spaces with people to do exactly what I said. And then we will debrief at the end of that about what part worked and what didn't. And then we'll take all those ideas and sort of cook that stuff up and figure out if the next step is going directly to projects because they're well enough elaborated, or whether the next step is to say, you know, the 3 common themes that came up were ATMs, iPads and cell phones, and water skiing. And that we're going to send out a grant proposal across our faculty of 14,000 that says, we have these ideas to do X. If you have ideas about doing this, apply for this funding. And then we'll take people from the group and contact them again and say, would you like to work on a team with this group of researchers to address this issue? And then we'll figure out. And I suspect it'll be easier to do by sort of using Zoom or some sort of telecommunications tool so people aren't always in cars. But it'll be a process of learning. Yeah. All right. The question is that a lot of solutions that are elaborated end up being really expensive, whether they are generated from the patient community or whether they're generated by other people. And so how do you sort of address the issue of affordability? And I mean, that is clearly a problem that plagues American medicine way beyond, or all medicine, honestly, way beyond the scope of this. But that said, I think that is part of the issue here, is how to do things with real efficiency. And often if stuff is generated in this way, it sort of starts from a smaller scale. So there are ways that can chip away at price. For example, if you go to a company with a really highly elaborated prototype and you've already shown that it addresses the needs of a community so that there is a market for it, then you jumpstart a huge amount of blind investment on the part of the company. That can help to hold the price down. If you can sort of consolidate communities of use, so people who've had amputations with people who are disabled because of fibrosis from scleroderma or calcinosis, people who have had burns and are scarred, et cetera, then you start sort of developing constituencies. The other way to do it that we've thought about is actually working directly with insurance companies on some of this, and that is going to be one of the things that we try to trial during this, which is to say to them, you know, really, if you could take, if you could develop on the side, sort of on the cheap and reasonably, a device that allows people to cook without getting their arms over a pot of boiling water, right? Where if you have scleroderma, you may not actually sense the steam hitting your arm and may sort of get a bad burn. If you could do that, it's actually in the insurance company's interest to have that happen, because otherwise they have to pay for you to get skin grafts for bad burns. So I think there are different kinds of things around this. The other thing is that, you know, things that are actually much cheaper. Now, building an exoskeleton isn't cheap yet. It can be done, as you're probably aware, but it's incredibly expensive and it's not yet really ready for prime time. However, there are things that are pretty darn close to an exoskeleton right now that can be done with a 3D printer in somebody's basement and a really good software programmer. So, you know, it's going to be walking the lines between those sorts of models and prototypes and final devices. But you're right, you have to sort of keep your eye on what that is and what the capacity of that is. And so it's going to be a range of solutions that go from stuff that's incredibly cheap and simple to probably trying to jumpstart one or two of the things that would be in the end more elaborate and more expensive, and then figuring out whether that can be done at scale or not. But I will tell you, and it's not a pipe dream, there is, if you are in an area that has malaria and you're treating malaria, one of the things you need to know is what the malarial load in a patient is. So there are amazingly expensive ways to do that, and that is the way in which it is done in pretty much every hospital. That was posed in a somewhat similar way to a friend of mine who's a chemist over at Harvard and an engineer, as a problem to which people wanted a solution. So we have this incredibly expensive technology that takes a long time and gives you a fancy lab printout, tells you what the malarial load is. And so he listened to this problem and he came back the next week with a glass capillary tube, which is a little thing that looks like a little tiny miniaturized skinny straw. It's hollow, just, you know, it's a straw, only in mini version, about 3 inches long. And said, okay, so if you take this straw and you prick somebody's finger and you do the blood test up into that, like you guys sometimes get CBCs done, and I take that blood and I spin it around, I can tell you the malarial load in the amount of time it takes for it to stop spinning. So he just went and sort of mixed some chemicals and he came up with a gradient, and all the malaria bugs sit in the middle of the gradient. You can actually see them there because they're a darker red, and he could read it right off of the tube. The tube costs less than a penny. The spinner costs $10. And then that's one spinner for the lab. So you can now do, for a penny a time, a test, which legitimately to run used to cost $1,000. And he got to that answer directly from the users, the people who needed it, in under a week. So, you know, there's a lot of intellectual power that has not been turned to problems because they just haven't been defined in a way that people understand them. And that's the kind of thing we'd like to duplicate. Anne? Yeah, it would be very helpful to gather the contact information and for someone to send it to me by email. Okay, so I'm one of those pathetic people who write stuff on napkins and paper towels when I'm really excited, and then I get home and then I figure out I neither have the napkin nor the paper towel. So you don't want to do that with me, but if someone puts it together and gets it to me or to Gary, that would be great. And by the way, we would very much welcome, we want to sort of co-create a process as well as solutions. So if you have questions, you sit there and you think afterwards, that is such a pipe dream because this is a huge problem. Please write me down. Tell us what your insights are about where it's not going to work. Tell us where your insights are about, wow, I could already see that it would be better if you grouped patients by doing this or that. Or if you made sure that you had somebody who works with people with these sorts of disabilities in the room, or you know, whatever insights you have about process are as welcome to us as insights that you have about problems and solutions. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I can't tell you how impressive this conversation has been, and while I'm not going to do it, I'm guessing that as Ann just did, if we were to canvass the room and ask for raised hands about who'd be interested in following up, it would be a bunch of you. Please, those of you who would be in that group who raised your hands, let's get in touch with Ann and me and make certain that we follow up with this conversation. Also, Dr. Eva Guinan will be sitting on the Ask the Experts panel for the next hour and a half, so we'll have more opportunity to ask questions and do follow-up. So thank you all very much. Lunch has now concluded, and we're going to take